Hi and welcome to another exciting episode. I'm cutting equal pieces of treated 2x4 pine wood by clamping a temporary barrier at the end of my miter saw. This way I don't have to remeasure the exact same length over and over again. These pieces will be used as the bottom of the woodshed. If you do it on your own, make sure that while at the lumber yard or the store, you select unbroken pieces of wood, as the price for them will be exactly the same, but you will have to cut them later and lose time and materials. Another way of accelerating the process is to get several pieces at once. I do it slowly, keep my hands away from the blade, and aware of what is a kickback. After cutting the pieces, I lay them on the floor and start the assembly. I'm using a framing nailer rather than using nails and hammer, since it's much faster, and on most occasions select nails that will reach maximum to the middle of the target piece. I'm nailing them about every 16 inch. If I'm not mistaken, I use 2.5 inch nails, 15 gauge. Using this piece for structural integrity, which will provide better overall structural strength. The floor edges will be attached to this piece. I will show it later in this video. I had to trim 1/2 inch from the edges of the inner pieces. The reason is, when you buy a 2x4, it's not the actual 2x4, the actual size is 1.5 by 3.5. Those are the inner pieces from a different angle. They are longer than the previous skeleton, so I will be able to comfortably nail them to the next wooden pieces. I'm assembling the 3 remaining parts in the same way as the first. Adding air tool oil to my nailers per requirement. At this point, things start to get heavy, and my wife helped me in the initial assembly. These are the upper pieces that will support the roof's weight. I'm using total 4, 2 on each side, 2 by 6 by 14 treated lumber. I've marked the middle beforehand and now moving the pieces to that spot. Now that the back is done, I can move the structure to its final position. I have also nailed it to the existing deck. Here you can clearly see why I made the interior pieces longer. It is important to install the board with the crown up. If the edges are not touching a leveled floor, then it's required to flip it. Now there is a crown. Otherwise, in time, the board will continue bending to the wrong direction and the overall structural integrity will weaken and bend. Make sure that everything is leveled. For the roofing joists, I mark the required angle and cut per it. Then, attach the pieces every 16 inch. For the framing and roof, I use cedar wood and 2 layers of semi-transparent stain called coffee. For the floor, I used treated wood and covered it with solid color, also coffee. I probably should not have attached the first piece directly to the joists, but instead use another small angled piece. Why? To achieve the exact same angle as the other roofing boards. Anyhow, I carefully placed and clamped it before nailing. This process involved a lot of up and down the ladder, but eventually, thanks to my super abilities, took only 6 seconds. Then I repeat the same with the remaining boards. Now you can see why I initially added extra board for the edges of the floor. Without it, it would have hung in thin air. I also leave a gap between the boards for ventilation. I placed the boards that I cut in the beginning of this video under the floor, every 16 inch, and nailed everything instead of using screws. For the framing, I used a 16 gauge finish nailer. It has smaller finish nails that are barely visible. Ha! Talking about barely visible. I'm using shims for a flush finish. I got some gaps, but I'm not really worried about it. I cut the upper board with the same angle as the roofing joists and then pushed it in place. I eventually covered all the visible areas. Okay, now that we're done with science fiction, back to reality. I eventually decided to rent a wood splitter, and oh boy, it was so much faster. Even with the wood splitter, this job is not easy at all due to the constant squats it requires when lifting and loading the wood. This part was a pain in the butt. Due to this and my previous landscaping project, I learned in the hard way it's always easier to first paint and then install. I installed the X on the side of the shed with those round end screws. To hold the X in place, I tapped a finish nail next to it. I bought some used X for decoration, finished it with the same coffee semi-transparent stain, and got rid of the rust by applying a product called CLR, calcium lime rust, and it was gone in less than a minute. To avoid unwanted movement, I bent the nails. I think it looks good. In time I might add a couple more X's under it. Time taken, around 6 days. Cost for materials, including the wood splitter rental, around $1,000. Cost for materials and tools, around $3,500. Thanks for watching!